Good afternoon, Mark. It was day one for Ben Bernanke here on Capitol Hill. 2 days of testimony in all. His semi-annual testimony on monetary policy and the economy. Big picture, Ben Bernanke says the recovery is gaining traction, he says, but with unemployment still at 9% right now, he believes that the quantitative easing program, the Fed's bond purchase program, should remain in place. He also talked about the rise in commodity prices we've seen with the unrest in the Middle East, what we're seeing in North Africa, and says for the moment, he does not believe it's a big threat to the overall economy. Here's some of what the Fed chairman had to say.
My sense is that the increases that we've seen so far, while obviously a problem for a lot of people, do not yet pose a significant risk either to the recovery or to the maintenance of overall stable inflation. However, we'll just have to continue to watch. If we see any significant additional increases, we'll obviously have to take that very seriously.
And certainly members of the panel asked some questions about inflation. They also asked a lot of questions about the quantitative easing program. Was it itself stoking inflation? What would the Fed be doing about exiting from that program? I'm joined now by Senator Richard Shelby, the top Republican on the Banking Committee, who asked some questions of his own today regarding QE2. Thank you for the time, as always. And the Fed chairman says quantitative easing is working, and he pointed to the rise in equity prices, the narrowing of corporate bond spreads. You're not convinced?
I'm not convinced. A lot of people aren't convinced because long-term interest rates, basically, since quantitative easing started, have gone up. The object was to make them go down. That hadn't worked. The economy, as you pointed out, is hovering around 9%, maybe higher, higher in a lot of areas. The balance sheet of the Federal Reserve is at unprecedented levels, over $2.5 trillion. We're going to have to see if this is working. I think the jury's out. There's a lot of dissent in the Fed about it.
Well, certainly the Fed chairman can point to GDP, talked about the 7th straight quarter of growth, talked about a 2011 outlook that is better even than 2010. Again, he's sticking to his guns. He says this is working well. That was his response to Senator Menendez.
Well, I hope that it will work. But this could be a jobless recovery, so to speak. If millions of people are still out of work, that's no recovery. A lot of small businesses are not hiring, don't know where they're going to get their next loan to create jobs and help sustain themselves. That's not working. So there's a lot of questions to ask, and we certainly asked some today.
Today, he also talked again about the unrest in the Middle East, the rise that we're seeing in commodity prices, specifically oil. Says temporary, most likely, relatively modest impact, not only on inflation, but the larger recovery. Again, your thoughts about what's happening in terms of commodity prices?
Well, I think commodity prices have been rising. What's happened in the Middle East is pumped the oil on up past $100 a barrel. I hope it's temporary, but we'll have to see if the commodity prices sustain themselves. We're going to have an inflation problem.
You've seen the rise in oil prices. Again, if you look just at core inflation, the Fed chairman says, listen, that looks pretty contained right now.
I like that. But on the other hand, you can't deny the price of oil and everything that comes out of it, derived from it, comes out. Look at the other commodity prices in the world that have been rising. We can't deny the obvious.
The Fed chairman was dragged into the spending fight here in Washington, specifically offered a little bit of an assist to Republicans. He said that the $60 billion in spending cuts over in the House side, he doesn't think that would have a huge impact on economic growth. Goldman Sachs says something different.
Well, I've seen both of them. I think we're going to have to cut more. We're going to have to be wise in where we cut and how we do it. But we're not there yet. We're playing at the margins.
All right. Let me ask you finally about a separate issue, one that I know you've been following closely, and that's the tanker fight at the Pentagon, the contract for a new aerial refueling tanker going to Boeing. You were pushing hard for EADS, the European company. They would have built that plane in your home state of Alabama. Do you have any idea at this point if EADS is going to protest?
I don't know. I hope they do, but they have to look at their internal documents to decide that. I believe that was a political decision. The administration would deny it, but this was not the best plane for the warfighter. That should be the criteria. So
you aren't convinced Boeing had the most competitive bid? The Pentagon says they were the clear winner.
Oh, I don't think so. And if it did, it's because the Pentagon changed the rules.
All right, Senator Richard Shelby, thanks very much for your thoughts on that, as well as Ben Bernanke's testimony. Mark, we'll send it back to you in New York. Ben